In this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at solving rational equations. Now, a rational equation is any equation that involves a rational expression, and rational expressions are basically fractions involving variables. So this problem that you see right here is a very basic form of a rational equation. Now, of course, this is a very familiar one, but we're starting with the familiar as we jump into the somewhat more unfamiliar today. So if we're going to solve this, this is, of course, also known as a proportion in its current state. In order to solve this, the typical method is to cross multiply. Cross multiplication works because we're basically multiplying both sides by the denominators. So I'm multiplying both sides first by 18 and both sides then by 20, which then has the effect of just cross multiplying. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start by doing the x times 20, which would give me 20x. Then I would do the 18 times 11, which gives me 198. Then I just need to finish solving out for x. So that means I would divide both sides by 20. So I end up with x equals 9.9 in this particular case. Okay, so simple proportion, right? The same idea is going to be true and is going to work for all of the different problems that we do in this. So here's our next one. Notice very similar, also looks very simple, except you'll notice here we have multiple x's. And that's going to happen. They're going to be more and more complex as we go here. But our basic strategy is still the same, where I can still cross multiply. If I cross multiply here, I end up doing the x times the x, which ends up giving me the x squared. And then I do the 2 times the 8, which gives me the 16. Remember, when we cross multiply, the two products are set equal to each other here. All right, and now I solve this. Now in this case, it's a quadratic. I have x squared equals 16. So we solve that by taking the square root of both sides. And what do we need to remember to include when we take the square root of both sides of an equation? I hope you're remembering both that plus or the minus, because here we have answers of both 4 and -4 as being options. You might have been able to just look at it and be able to see that 4 would be an option, but we often would miss the fact that -4 is also a solution here. So remember, whenever it's x squared, remember the plus or the minus there. We'll end up with 2 possible solutions. All right, and now we go on to our next problem. And of course, write this one down, especially as we start getting into these trickier problems now. And then write down the work that we do as we go. So our strategy is the same, where we're going to cross multiply. But in this case, when we cross multiply, this 18 has to multiply by both the x and the 3. We're distributing, so it's going to be 18 times x plus 3 like that. And then when we cross multiply going the other direction, that would be 15 times the x plus 5. So really, this is our first step. And then we need to actually distribute the 18 into its parentheses and the 15 into its parentheses. Once we've done that, then it's just a matter of solving the resulting equation. Well, I have x's on both sides. I have numbers on both sides. I could start many different ways. However, in this case, I'm actually going to start by moving the 15x to the other side. I always like to move my x's together first, and I always like to keep my x's positive. So that's why I chose to do it this way, but of course you could have done other things first. When we do that subtraction then, though, the next step is now more prescribed, because I have the x already over here on the left side, but I need the 54 out of there. So I need to subtract 54 from both sides. And now that I have 3x equals 21, we just divide both sides by 3 to end up with x equals 7. Notice one solution here, because it was an x, not an x squared. And of course, make sure you have this written down correctly in your notes, and then we'll proceed on to the next problem. Remember that because this is a recording, you can always pause it while you get stuff written down if you need to. All right, and then we head into our last problem that we're doing in this lesson. And the strategy again is still the same. We're still going to cross multiply here. Now, in order to cross multiply here, that means I'm going to have to be doing x minus 5 times x plus 5. And then that's going to be equal to cross multiply the other direction, where we're going to end up having to do the 24 times the x, which of course is just 24x. But on the left side there, if I'm going to multiply out x minus 5 times x plus 5, remember that you have to multiply everything in the first parentheses by everything in the second parentheses. So this x multiplies by both the x and the plus 5, and the minus 5 also multiplies by the x and by the plus 5. When we do that and combine like terms, we end up with just x squared minus 25 there. So in this case, we have x squared minus 25 equals 24x. Now you'll notice we do have an x squared in there. So I can't just move x to one side and the numbers to the other because it's a quadratic. So in order to solve a quadratic then, our first step is going to be to set it equal to 0. So whenever you do one of these problems and you find that you've gotten a quadratic, set it equal to 0. Now my recommendation is that if you have multiple x squareds in there, and often you will, that you do try to keep your x squared positive, because that's going to make any factoring that you try to do afterwards much simpler to do. Now in this case though, of course, we don't have multiple x squareds. We already have our x squared over here on the left. It's already positive, so I want to leave it there. So I'm going to take the 24x and I'm going to move it from the right to the left. Since that's a positive 24x and I want 0 left behind, I'm going to subtract 24x from both sides. Now that I have my quadratic set equal to 0, we solve it. Now in solving it, yes, we have many methods at our disposal. And you can choose from among them, but I recommend that you always try factoring first. And in this particular case, factoring will actually serve you well. So in order to factor this, we would say what two numbers add to negative 24 and multiply to negative 25. That would be negative 25 and 1. Now that I know that, I can solve it. I can figure out what x equals. What minus 25 equals 0? Well, that'd be a positive 25. And then what plus 1 equals 0? Well, that'd be negative 1. And so there are our two solutions. And so notice when doing this sort of problem, you end up cross-multiplying, and then that gives you some equation. And you have to look at the resulting equation type to know how to solve it. If it's linear, move the x's to one side and the numbers to the other side. If it's quadratic, set it equal to 0, and then solve from there by factoring, or should you need to, you could use quadratic formula or something like that as well.